Hi, this is Margaret Menke with Crossroads Report. I wanted to come on tonight and talk a little bit about the incredible events of the last week with the confirmation hearings of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to serve as Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. These were the biggest hearings that the Senate Health Committee has seen in years. And according to Callie Means, who's working with both President Trump and Kennedy, they were told by US senators that these confirmation hearings and the number of people who showed up at the Capitol complex to lobby senators was the biggest grassroots movement, the biggest populist turnout that they've ever seen in their Senate careers for any cabinet nomination of anyone to serve in any presidential administration. So I think those of us who've been in the health freedom movement or following it in some way are not really surprised by this, because we understand how huge it really is that Kennedy was appointed by Trump to head HHS, which oversees the CDC, the FDA, the NIH, the NIAID, and then also several other sub-agencies and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, which are huge. This is a $1.7 trillion agency. So it is, if you include Medicare and Medicaid, which it's mostly payouts, but it is, in terms of budget, the largest federal agency that we have in our federal government. So we had two hearings on January 29th before the Senate Finance Committee, January 30th before the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, which I'm just going to refer to it as the Health Committee, because that's really, for our purposes, what it was for the Kennedy hearings. And I put a piece up on my Substack, which is called Crossroads Report. You can find me there. I put a piece up early this morning on what Kennedy said in those nomination hearings about vaccines. And I wasn't exactly surprised. I wasn't too happy. And I'm sure a lot of others in the medical freedom movement weren't too happy as well. But he made several statements about being pro-vaccine. I'm not anti-vaccine. He said, I support the vaccine schedule. I will do nothing to make vaccines unavailable to Americans. I vaccinated all of my kids, and on and on and on. It specifically said he supports the measles vaccine and the polio vaccine. And so I thought a lot about this and really went back and reviewed a lot of these statements. And I think what we can conclude is that he said what he needed to say to get passed out, or to get his confirmation approved by the Senate Finance Committee. Yep, so I've got up here on screen, here was the headline: is RFK Jr. now pro-vaccine? Has MAHA capitulated to the pharmaceutical industrial complex? And the answer, if you read the piece, is no, it hasn't. We have not capitulated. Kennedy has not capitulated. And I compared what he said about not being pro-vaccine to the wonderful Scott Adams in his book saying, I'm not anti-business, I'm anti-idiot. So for years, Scott Adams did these comic strips where he's ridiculing people in the business world. And it's very funny. Anyone who read Dilbert will remember, if you've worked in offices, is great humor. So he was really accused of being anti-business. Well, gee, you're always ridiculing, the business world, these business practices, and are you anti-business? And so he came out with this book. I'm not anti-business, I'm anti-idiot. So we can say the same about what Kennedy said in the confirmation hearings about vaccines. He's not anti vaccines. He's anti-idiot vaccines. He's anti-vaccines that are based on junk science. That's not really what vaccinology is supposed to be. No one can really, I think if we really think about it, none of us can really say we're anti-vaccine if we understand that a vaccine is this magic potion that, you know, shoot into your bloodstream, and it prevents you 100% from getting a deadly disease that you might otherwise get, and has no serious side effects that, except for maybe a fever or something like that. Who would be against that? That's what a vaccine is, and that's what the Democrats on these committees are thinking a vaccine is, and that's what they mean when they say vaccine, and that's what the chair of the Senate Health Committee means when he says vaccines. Okay, then we're all pro-vaccine, and we're all pro-vaccine. And so I also compared it to...
Sorry, I don't understand.
I also compared it to Enron. So we can say, all Americans can say we're pro-business, right? We're pro-business. Well, Enron is a business. Are you pro-Enron? You know, during the Enron collapse, when everything was revealed about the Enron fraud, if you were pro-Enron, did that mean that you were anti-business? Well, no, and this isn't a perfect analogy, but was Enron really a business? If you remember those hearings before the U.S. Congress, and then of course the whole bankruptcy went to court, what came out was that Enron wasn't really a business. It called itself a business, but it was really a criminal enterprise. They weren't really making money. They were shifting money around. They spun out 100 different corporations and were shifting money around between all of them. They were lying to their accountants, the outside accounting firm, Arthur Andersen, which crashed and burned and went bankrupt over this whole thing. But they lied to Arthur Andersen. Arthur Andersen couldn't audit their books. It was impossible because there were all these different entities and money moving around, and then they also hired Enron separately, or Arthur Andersen, for a consulting contract. So it was revealed that Arthur Andersen had a major conflict of interest that they couldn't because they were making money on the consulting side. So the company had a major conflict, and for that reason, they didn't catch all of these enormous accounting errors. So I think it's a pretty good analogy, because when we're talking about the vaccines, we're pro-vaccine, but we want vaccines, of course, that are based on sound science, that have strong safety studies behind them, as they're supposed to. And the conflicts of interest involved mean that, yep, and I put up a video in this piece of Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, his interaction with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And one of the last things that Kennedy said to Chris Murphy was, listen, I'm coming in here to get rid of the conflicts of interest within the agency. He either said with or within, it was hard to hear, with the agency, and make sure we have gold standard evidence-based science. So the Democrats didn't really follow that up. I don't think that they understand. I don't think that they have enough information. They don't really know how bad the science is that is holding up vaccines, that is supporting the whole vaccine program at the CDC. It's bad. So when the conflicts of interest are eliminated and gold standard evidence-based science replaces that junk science that is now being used by the CDC, we'll see how many vaccines are left and can remain on the CDC schedule of recommended childhood vaccinations. I don't think too many. I think most of them are going to fall off. So then I wanted
Thank you very
to
much.
switch and talk about. So this was, yeah, I wanted to switch and talk about, because I think it's ultimately not too concerning what Kennedy said in those hearings about being pro-vaccine and not anti-vaccine and supporting the whole vaccine schedule. It's not too concerning. But what was really concerning is what Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana, said on the Senate floor on, let's see, that was this past week. I think it was Tuesday. After he voted to pass the confirmation out of the Senate Finance Committee, and he did vote for Kennedy, and he was the deciding vote because that committee had 14 Republicans and 13 Democrats. All the Democrats voted no for Kennedy. So Kennedy needed every single one of those Republicans to vote yes to pass his nomination out of the Senate Finance Committee so it can go to the Senate floor. And it still hasn't. But they needed Kennedy's vote. And then Kennedy is separately chair of the Health Committee. So he was in a really powerful position. And he did agree to vote for Kennedy, and he did in the Senate Finance Committee. But then that same day, he went onto the Senate floor to explain his committee vote, which is very unusual. I've not heard of a senator doing that. Usually they would just explain their vote in the committee. But the reason you would go to the Senate floor is because anything that's said by a United States senator on the floor of the US Senate becomes part of the permanent record of the US Senate. It used to be published in the Federal Register, I believe. But anyway, I mean, you could go and look up, from 25 or 50 or 100 years ago, what such and such a senator said on the Senate floor. And it's this permanent record of the United States Senate, which is supposed to be the greatest, what do they call it? It's the greatest deliberative body, I think, in our country. But anyway, he wanted evidently to make a permanent record of what he was saying. And I think when we listen to what he's saying, we can see why that is. So I want to go ahead and play that video because what he says in this video is going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem for Kennedy. It's going to be a problem for everything that Kennedy wants to do as Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen and show you what Cassidy, Senator Cassidy of Louisiana, said to the Senate. And this was this week, Tuesday. And the video is a little long, so I'm going to start.
I strongly agree that this is an issue society must address. Other RFK supporters are concerned regarding environmental risk. They fear these risks are being ignored by authorities. Mr. Kennedy's history of environmental activism motivates once more, it leaves vaccines. Now, Mr. Kennedy and the administration reached out seeking to reassure me regarding their commitment to protecting the public health benefit of vaccination. To this end, Mr. Kennedy and the administration committed that he and I would have an unprecedentedly close collaborative working relationship if he is confirmed. We will meet or speak multiple times a month. This collaboration will allow us to work well together and therefore to be more effective. Mr. Kennedy has asked for my input into hiring decisions at HHS beyond Senate confirmed positions, and this aspect of the collaboration will allow us to represent all sides of those folks who are contacting me over this past weekend. He has also committed that he would work within current vaccine approval and safety monitoring systems and not establish parallel systems. If confirmed, he will maintain the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices recommendations without changes. CDC will not remove statements on their website pointing out that vaccines do not cause autism. Mr. Kennedy and the administration also committed that this administration will not use the subversive techniques used under the Biden administration, like sue and settle, to change policies enacted by Congress without first going through Congress. Mr. Kennedy and the administration committed to a strong role of Congress. Aside from he and I meeting regularly, he will come before the Help Committee on a quarterly basis if requested. He committed that the Help Committee chair, whether it's me or someone else, may choose a representative on any board or commission formed to review vaccine safety. If he is confirmed, HHS will provide a 30-day notice to the Help Committee if the agency seeks to make changes to any of our federal vaccine safety monitoring programs, and Help Committee will have the option to call a hearing to further review. These commitments and my expectation that we can have a great working relationship to make America healthy again is the basis of my support. He will be the secretary working for this end. If Mr. Kennedy is confirmed, I will use my authority as chairman of the Senate Committee with oversight of HHS to rebuff any attempt to remove the public's access to life-saving vaccines without ironclad causation and defended before the mainstream scientific community and before Congress. I will watch carefully for any effort to wrongfully sow public fear about vaccines between confusing references that this will not have to be a concern, and that he and I can work together to build an agenda to make America healthy again. We need a leader at HHS who will guide President Trump's agenda to make America healthy.
We got the point. We got the message from Cassidy. He's in charge, not Kennedy. Cassidy's going to be in charge because he's a doctor, and yeah. Well, this was really stunning. So he says that he and Kennedy and the administration, it wasn't just Kennedy, reached this agreement, and that Kennedy agreed to all these things, the close working relationship, meet or speak several times a month. Well, okay, that's not a big deal. This is the chairman, the Senate chairman of the Health Committee, and they do have, these Senate committees do have some oversight responsibilities, so fine, of course. They can speak on the phone a few times a month. But then the number two was Cassidy gets input on hiring decisions at HHS beyond Senate confirmed positions. I'm laughing because we have a separation of powers. He has absolutely no right to insist on such a thing. I think it's outrageous. No, he doesn't get to decide who gets hired at HHS. He's not in charge. Separation of powers. This is the executive branch. He's not a member. Cassidy is not a member of the executive branch. It's the president, the White House, and Kennedy who should be making those hiring decisions, and the heads of the sub-agencies when they come in, the head of the CDC, the head of the FDA, NIH, NIAID. So Cassidy doesn't want anyone hired, and he's talking about political positions at HHS, and these are the policy-making positions. All of the federal bureaucrats who work there are not supposed to be in policy-making roles. They're not supposed to be making policy. They're supposed to be implementing the policy that's being made by the political people. And the political people are the people who come in with the new administration, who are on board with what the president wants. And this is how the executive branch has to work. So he wants input on hiring decisions at HHS beyond the Senate confirmed positions. So the Senate confirmed positions are going to include the head of the CDC, head of the FDA, NIH, NIAID. I believe those are all Senate confirmed. I don't know if there are any others. Oh, Dr. Oz at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid. So those he'll automatically already have input on those. They're going to come before his committee, but he wants input on all other political appointees who would be appointed, chosen by the White House or by Kennedy, probably jointly, to come in and staff HHS. He wants input on those. I don't think that could hold up under scrutiny by courts. I think it's a violation of separation of powers that's clearly spelled out in the Constitution. And so any agreement that's not constitutional would be null and void. However, is this going to go to court? I mean, that could take years for this to go to a federal court. I think the really concerning thing is that this was agreed to. And we can say, oh, well, I mean, Kennedy was just, and the administration were just doing what they needed to do to get Cassidy's consent and get this nomination through. And they're not really going to hold up their end of the bargain, but I don't think we can say that. And this is a senator from the same party whose vote is going to be crucial on a lot of things that President Trump wants to get through the US Senate. So I don't think that there's any chance that the administration and Kennedy would just say, sure to all of this, not intending to follow through. And I do believe Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is an honorable man, so that if he looked Senator Cassidy in the eye and told him he would do these things, I think he's going to try to do these things. So he is boxed in. That's the way I see it. Senator Cassidy has boxed him in, and he's going to be boxed in somewhat. He'll still be able to do some things, but he's not going to be able to do a lot of things that we'd like to see happen, at least not quickly. So the other things that he listed: work with the current vaccine approval and monitoring systems and not establish parallel safety monitoring systems. So those monitoring systems are VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. And then also there's the, I forget what it is. Oh, it's the Vaccine Safety Data Link. And that data is never released. It's under lock and key. VAERS, we know what VAERS shows. VAERS shows thousands upon thousands of vaccine injuries. And just in the COVID era alone, many thousands of reported deaths following vaccination, suspected to be from vaccination related to it. many thousands of vaccine injuries. And it didn't make any difference. The CDC knew very well, it's their own system. They knew very well about all of these reports and chose not to act on them. So what is the point of a safety monitoring system if the information is not acted upon? There's no point at all, really. And our media refused to report on anything that was in these safety monitoring systems as well. So he can't establish any parallel safety monitoring systems. Okay. Then number 4 was maintain the ACIP recommendations with no changes. So the ACIP committee is, the advisory committee, the CDC's advisory committee that advises on vaccines. So there are 2 different advisory committees under HHS that advise on vaccines. One is the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP, and that is part of the CDC. And then there's a second one, VRBAC, the Vaccine and Related Biologics Advisory Committee, and that is part of the FDA. And when a vaccine is seeking approval, they have to go before both of those committees. And then those committees recommend that the vaccine get approval. And so number 4 is maintain the CDC Advisory Committee ACIP's recommendations with no changes. So again, it's not allowed. The Secretary of HHS, the head of the CDC, they don't have to take the recommendations of those advisory committees. They're solely recommendations. And in fact, in the last few years, when either the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine were going before one of those advisory committees, I think one of those advisory committees recommended no on approval of the vaccine for certain ages at one point, and the head of either the CDC or the FDA contradicted their own advisory committee's recommendation and went the other way. So it's completely permissible. So this is insane to me that Cassidy is saying you have to take the recommendation of this advisory committee. You have no choice. And that's what Kennedy agreed to. But okay, it's not the end of the world, but it's not great. So number 5 was the CDC will not remove statements on its website pointing out that vaccines do not cause autism. He's dictating what they can put on their website. They can't take anything off of the website that says vaccines do not cause autism. Okay. Number 6, no subversive techniques like sue. I looked it up. I mean, I thought I knew, but it's what you'd think. Sue and settle refers to when a federal agency agrees to a settlement agreement. Let me rephrase that because that wasn't great English. This is from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Sue and settle refers to when a federal agency enters into a settlement agreement in a lawsuit from special interest groups to create priorities and rules. So instead of trying to make a change inside the agency, you just look at who's suing us over what, and then if there's a policy change you want to make, you settle with to adopt that policy automatically, if that makes sense. So it's very easy to see how Kennedy could have made a lot of changes that way through sue and settle at HHS, because of course Children's Health Defense and ICANN and Aaron Siri and others are suing HHS frequently over things, and so HHS could just enter into settlement agreements and agree, oh yeah, we do need to suspend, the polio vaccine until we have real safety data, until real studies are done that observe the participants for more than 3 days. So we can't do that. So no sue and settle. And then number 7 was Kennedy has agreed to come before the Senate Health Committee on a quarterly basis if requested. And quarterly, that's pretty frequent, but okay. Number 8, the Health Committee chair, this was kind of crafty. Cassidy said, me or my successor. I don't know how he could enter into an agreement that would be binding on his successor. Either I or my successor may choose one representative of any board or committee established to review vaccine safety. Okay, one representative. Okay, so the board has 30 people on it. You get one. Okay. Then the last one was a 30-day notice to the Health Committee if there are any changes to the vaccine safety monitoring system. Any changes? A lot of changes need to be made to those systems because they don't capture most vaccine injuries and deaths. So any change, yeah. And then the last thing you said was Mr. Kennedy is committed to a strong role of Congress. But this is way too strong. This is ridiculous. Gets to tell a federal agency who they can and can't hire. Absolutely ridiculous. But if he honors all these things, and I think he will, can be boxed in somewhat. But I did give it some thought, and I think there's still a lot he can do. There really is. So what can he do? I explained what the advisory committees are, and they're key, ACIP and VRBAC. One's with the CDC and one's with the FDA. And they are made up of doctors, physicians, and scientists. I mean, they have a mix of virologists, epidemiologists, pediatricians, and some others. And so they are not employees of federal agencies. They're, they have their own research labs or medical practices in the various states, and they have these meetings, and they listen to all of the evidence presented, and they decide whether or not to recommend that a vaccine be approved. So Kennedy could, as far as I can see, change out the members of these committees. There's nothing Cassidy said that seemed to contradict that. He should absolutely do that. I think Kennedy has pointed out that many members of these committees, if not the great majority of them, have huge conflicts of interest. So they've taken money from vaccine companies, from pharmaceutical companies, or they've worked for them. Major conflicts, and many of them shouldn't be on there. I had an experience when I was writing for the Epic Times a few years ago. I did call up the chairman of one of these committees, and I think it was ACIP, might have been VRBAC, and it's an old guy, an old doctor. He's like 90 years old, named, his name was Alfred Monto, and I did find a number for him. He's a doctor practicing in Michigan. And I did get him on the phone, and we started to have a nice conversation, and then I did ask him about vaccine injuries, and he quickly hung up on me. And my question was very polite. It wasn't an outrageous question, and I just, asked about what he thought about vaccine injuries, and he just hung up. The phone just went dead. So these are the kinds of people who sit on these committees, the folks who just aren't willing to really engage at all and field the most basic kinds of questions. Of course, there are vaccine injuries. There's no debate about that. The only debate is, are they worth it? How many are there, and how severe are they really? And you cannot say that there are no vaccine injuries. There are a lot, and some are very serious, and a lot of families are suffering. So anyone who serves on these committees should be absolutely open to hearing all evidence of all sorts. They should be real, true scientists who are willing to pursue the truth wherever it may lead, without fear or favor or conflicts of interest. So I do think that they can change out people on those committees. And so we would have coming in, hopefully, as head of the CDC, former Florida Congressman Dave Weldon, who's excellent, and as head of the FDA, Marty Makary, who is a physician at Johns Hopkins and was outspoken during COVID about lockdowns, and he also testified on the origin of COVID at one of the COVID origin hearings. Excellent, very smart, and inquiring, open-minded. So I believe they could change out the members of those committees. I don't see why they shouldn't. So second thing they could do, release all information on safety studies and lack of safety studies for vaccines. Aaron Siri, who's the prominent attorney who does a lot of vaccine cases, has petitioned the HHS repeatedly to get information on safety studies, and it has not been forthcoming. It's taken years. Kennedy talked about how he, it took him a long time to try to get safety studies from Fauci, and then Anthony Fauci finally ended up admitting that there weren't any. There really weren't any real safety studies for any vaccines that were on the childhood schedule. So all this information should be released, and I think that'll happen. Kennedy doesn't need my suggestion about radical transparency, the need for radical transparency when it comes to HHS. So nothing hidden. Let everyone see everything. This is public information about the health of all Americans. Nothing should be behind closed doors under lock and key. We're done with all that. What else could he do? Release to the public email and text correspondence between employees concerned about lack of safety of some vaccines. There are people who work inside these agencies who have been really concerned about the vaccine schedule. We know that there were people either at the CDC or FDA who quit when the COVID vaccine was being approved for children. They rapidly just submitted their resignation after making their views known that the COVID vaccine was not appropriate to be given to children. And so it would be very interesting to see what correspondence they had with their supervisors before resignation. I'd love to see that. Their emails, they should be public record, and they can be released. And maybe I'll request them. And we hope that the HHS will respond to public requests from journalists in a way that they haven't over the last several years. Let's see. The HHS could do press releases announcing the total amount being paid out by the vaccine court every month or every year, and post these to the HHS homepage or on the CDC and FDA homepages. So the vaccine court has paid out more than $4 billion in its existence to families or people who've been injured or lost their lives from a vaccine. $4 billion they've paid out. And it's hard. It's hard to get, it takes about 4 years and a lot of money and effort to go to vaccine court. It's called the vaccine court. It's actually governed by a special master, he's called, and it's a no-fault compensation program that was set up by the 1986 bill, the same bill that gave vaccine makers an exemption from any legal liability for injuries. They could put cameras in the vaccine court. Wouldn't it be interesting to see a live stream or to go and watch a recorded video of the proceedings in vaccine court and see the testimony from families describing how their loved one was injured by a vaccine or worse? He can fire people. Cassidy said you can't hire people without my consent, but I think Kennedy can fire people. He can also transfer people. So anyone serving in the senior executive service in the U.S. government, and that is career employees, not political, but at the highest level, they can be transferred to any office anywhere, I think with 30 or 90 days notice, and they have to go. And the federal government has offices all over the country. So a lot of them would not want to be transferred out of the areas where they're now working. So that may get them to just quit. Kennedy could order investigations of all suspected vaccine deaths and all serious vaccine injuries. And as part of that, the CDC or FDA should be calling all parents and families who report that a child or a family member died from vaccines. That's not happening. If you report right now, if you report to the federal government through VAERS, or through other means by calling and saying, my daughter died 24 hours after getting the vaccine. She was not sick before, and she suddenly died. They do not have a conversation with you. They do not take down your information. They don't record an interview. If you report through theirs, they never pick up the phone and call you and say, we've gotten this report from you. Your child died after the vaccine. We'd like more information. We'd like to know what happened. We're so sorry. It doesn't happen right now. Believe it or not, it doesn't happen. They call people. They should be calling people, should be investigating every single reported vaccine-related death. They could also HHS could order autopsies for any suspected vaccine death, and they should be doing this. They should be ordering autopsies that include a special pathology test that would test for a vaccine reaction. There is a specific test that they can do, and it's never done unless the family knows about it and the family gets a tissue sample and sends it to an outside pathologist, hires their own pathologist, and has it done. This rarely happens because most people don't know anything about this. So our government should be doing this, absolutely. These special pathology tests should be ordered for all suspected vaccine deaths. 11, banning pharma ads on television. This is a big one. I'm not sure that Kennedy could do this on his own. I'd have to look into it more. It might have to be an act of Congress, maybe not. Pharma ads, pharmaceutical advertising makes up about 70% of non-election year advertising on television. So it's a huge revenue stream for CNN, MSNBC, all of these other channels, Fox News as well. Huge. It's a huge revenue stream. It's a lot of money coming in for them. And we know that it's the reason they never put a spotlight on vaccine injuries. They never wanted to talk about problems with vaccines because it's an enormous amount of money, and if they didn't have that money coming in, they'd have to fire people. Half of their business would shut down. So I think he could do that on his own. I know it's a priority for him. That needs to happen. It'll change everything. It'll be a game changer. What else? The CDC should be doing safety studies comparing vaccinated and unvaccinated kids. Representative Dan Burton, who is a wonderful congressman from Indiana, asked the CDC to do this years ago. I mean, I think 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. And he said, you've got to do those studies comparing vaccinated and unvaccinated kids. One group gets vaccines, the other group doesn't. And then you write up a report showing what's the difference in the health outcomes. Who's healthier, the vaccinated kids or the unvaccinated kids? Those studies were never done. They have not been done. So why not? Well, they don't want those studies done because they know what they'll show. So Kennedy can absolutely do those studies. There's nothing he told Senator Cassidy that would get in the way of that. Order an immediate investigation into the increase in all-cause mortality that followed the introduction of the COVID vaccine, the COVID vaccines in mid-December of 2020 is when they were first administered. And there were immediate spikes in all-cause mortality, immediate, right when the vaccines came in. And then in the third quarter of 2021, right as a lot of the vaccine mandates were going into effect at private workplaces, Goldman Sachs, for example, a lot of the hospitals, right around that time, August, September, October of 2021, was when all of these mandates were coming down. The federal government's mandate, the 3 Biden mandates on federal workers, healthcare workers, and federal contractors. All of those 3 were announced right in there. And so a lot of people were getting vaccinated right then. And in that quarter of 2021, we had the highest rate of all-cause mortality among working age people than we've ever seen in this country's history. And in particular, for people in their 30s and 40s, these were working age people who had pretty good jobs. This was the life insurance data. There was a doubling of deaths of people in their 30s and 40s. So extremely alarming. There has to be an investigation, and he could order one. And then I think a special investigator has to be appointed to look at the COVID vaccine, how it was approved, the safety studies that were really lacking, and then looking at the vaccine injuries and all of that, and then the rise in all-cause mortality. But and then another one. Let's see, Kennedy, can he revoke the emergency use authorization for the COVID vaccine? Can he do it unilaterally? I think he could. I don't think he's likely to do it. I don't think so. I think what he's going to attempt to do is to proceed with building a case against continued vaccination and building a case against the COVID vaccine. I know what he said in the hearing, that he believes that the COVID vaccine was a great thing. And again, I think he's saying in a way it was. There was a mission to produce this vaccine and distribute the vaccine, and the mission was fulfilled, and the vaccine was distributed. The job was completed successfully. However, there's a massive problem with the vaccine. So I'm sure he's going to be going back to look at that. Can he revoke the authorization, the COVID authorization for children, those under 18? I think he may try to do this. But again, I think he's going to proceed with gathering evidence, communicating that evidence, putting it before U.S. senators, before the Congress, before the American people, and only then trying to take action. Yeah, of course we'd like to see it happen. Of course, we'd like to see that revoked immediately. I don't think he can do it. I don't think he's going to try to do it. He's going to try to build a case for everything he wants to do, and then to bring it to a point where this has to happen, and it's clear to everyone that it has to happen. The emergency authorization has to be revoked, and then when he finally takes that action, he's got everything behind it. He's got a strong foundation. I've got a couple of other things on here. There's so much you could do with media relations. When I worked for the Epoch Times and I was calling the CDC and I was calling the FDA, let me tell you how it works. You can call the media number and you get through to a little media gal sometimes, and then they just say, well, can you email us with your questions? And then you email with the question, and then you usually don't hear back, or sometimes you do, but they do not let you, if you're not friendly media, and Epoch Times would not have been considered friendly media. If you're not friendly media, they don't talk to you. They don't let you talk to anyone who knows anything about vaccines. They do not allow interviews. They do not engage at all. They want you to email a question or tell them what your question is, and then they might respond and try to get you an answer to that specific question. So back to Kennedy and what he said about radical transparency. He wants radical transparency. Great. So the way I see that with the media relations department at HHS, CDC, and FDA is they pick up the phone and they really talk to you. And that's the way it should be. Our federal government should be willing to answer questions from the public or their representatives. Say media is the representative. Kind of, yes, because if I'm a journalist and I'm focused on a particular issue and really studying it very closely and have a platform and I have specific questions, I'm not asking on my behalf, just out of my own curiosity. I'm asking because I think it's valuable information. I think it's important information. When it's health, it's information that relates to life and death, and that people need to know to be able to keep themselves healthy. So our federal government should be answering questions from media, including smaller media. So I have a Substack called Crossroads Report, and I write for some other outlets as well, but I'm small media. I'm independent media. They should be taking questions and answering requests for information from small media as well as larger media. Their friends at NBC, ABC, CBS, New York Times, CNN. They need to take questions from everyone. They need to answer all questions from everyone and put more people on the media desk if that's what's required to do this. We need the radical transparency. So accessibility to smaller outlets and independent journalists, absolutely. One experience I had when I was with the Epoch Times is I was on a media call with, I think it was Peter Marks, who's one of the top vaccine guys with the CDC or FDA. He's one of them. And there was a lot of major media was on the call. I don't remember who, but it was probably NBC and Politico and CNN, and there were a few smaller outlets. I mean, I was representing the Epoch Times, and I did raise my hand to ask a question, and I never got called on. And that was my experience during COVID. It was my experience here in the state of Indiana, where I live too. They wouldn't let me on the calls with the governor when the governor was doing media calls, when it was Zoom and everyone was on Zoom. They wouldn't approve me to join the calls. Or maybe I got on a call one time, but they wouldn't take a question from me. So I did show up when they had an in-person press conference in December of 2021. I did show up and I did ask the governor a question. And and then I just got a nonsense answer that didn't make any sense. So this happened all during COVID. I'm sure it happened in almost every state. And it also happened at the federal level, where if you were independent media, if you were the Epoch Times and they knew you were going to have tough questions, you didn't get called on. You didn't get to ask your question. They didn't return your phone calls. You couldn't get information. So that needs to stop, absolutely. And I think it will. I'm hopeful. They could also do a conference on vaccine injuries. And I'd love to see that. Now, Senator Ron Johnson, during COVID, held his own sort of independent hearings on Capitol Hill on vaccine injuries, and they were fascinating and heart-wrenching to hear these stories from people. But no one else would come. No other senator would show up. It was just Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin doing these on his own. But I think that the HHS could have huge conferences on vaccine injuries where they listen to family members, and also people themselves who've been damaged by vaccines. They could do it and they could live stream it. So there's a lot Kennedy could do at HHS. Very concerning what Cassidy did on the Senate floor. Very concerning that this agreement was nailed down with all of these preconditions that seem to be boxing Kennedy in and making it a lot harder for him to really liberate health from this stranglehold of the pharmaceutical industrial complex, or whatever we want to call it. But it's not a lost cause. It's not a lost cause by any means. The absolute most important thing is that he get confirmed. And as far as I can see, I can't find a date, but I believe his confirmation hearing must be coming up this week. I don't know what excuse they could possibly have to deny it, or sorry, the confirmation vote on the Senate floor. It should be coming up this week, maybe Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. So we'll be watching closely. We'll be watching the Senate floor. We'll be watching the schedule and see when that vote is to come up. I do think he will be improved. I do think he will be our next Secretary of Health and Human Services. I think there's going to be a revolution in this country around public health, what we eat, what's allowed to go into our cereals. what farmers grow, what the SNAP program allows people to buy with their EBT cards, and what vaccines are administered by pediatricians in this country and by all doctors to older folks. It's going to be a revolution. But I would say, with the vote expected this week to approve Kennedy, really, the fight is just beginning. This is just the start of it. So it's going to be fascinating to see what happens. And I wanted to share my thoughts on all of this with you today. I have even more to say, but this is just really to focus on what happened with the agreement with Senator Cassidy and what implications that might have for Kennedy at HHS. So if you want to find my Substack, again, it is called Crossroads Report, and we'll be doing more videos going forward, probably to accompany what I write in the Substack. And go ahead and subscribe to the Substack if you like the content and think it's helpful. And I'll be posting this video on YouTube. If you want to like and subscribe there also, that would be a big help. So thanks for joining today, and have a great rest of the day.